Okay, so today we will continue with our exploration of different materials. And I've sent you some pictures of shiny objects. Now, metals are something that we find either as a whole object or we will find as bits and pieces here and there. Very often, metal is used to embellish certain objects. So, if you are drawing artifacts, you might have a trimming made of metal, or if you're doing, say, a recipe illustration, there you might have utensils or cutlery, which is in metal. And I found that very often that metal can throw people off, just how to illustrate it. So, in keeping with the theme for the month, I wanted to tackle this issue as well. It's just a few pointers, and you'll be able to see metal differently. And then obviously, you'll be able to then render it quite easily also. I'll just go over all the images that I've sent to you. So I've looked for metals in different colors. We have these white metal objects. Then we have a yellow metal and a reddish, bronzish metal. So color will not make so much of a difference once you learn to see metal in as metal itself. So like with water, we think of water more than we see water. Similarly, with metal, we think of it as metallic rather than seeing it as metal. I could very easily get a plastic jug like this and paint it in a shiny reflective color, and that will imitate metal. So we need to look at metals also very objectively. And if you just break everything down, it just comes down to line, shape, shade. In the shades, you will have highlights, mid-tones, highlights, mid-tones, dark tones or shadows. And then you will have reflections also. And reflections would just be distortions in the surface of the metal, depending upon what that metal is reflecting back. So other than this, there's really nothing to metals. So we need to just identify the sections in which you will have highlights, the shape of that highlight with respect to the shape of the midtones and the shadows and the reflections within its neighborhood. That's all there is to it. So in an object like this, you will see that we have highlights in these following places. I'll just point them out to you. There is one big highlight over here. Then you will have, then you see highlights over here. That's now receding. They're smaller and smaller in size. And depending upon the shape of the object, the highlight follows a contour. So you will have a shape that follows this line, which in a sense is the silhouette of the shape of that jug itself. And potentially you can draw this object without even using a reference image. And that means that if you want to draw your own jug of a different shape, just learning how shadows and highlights fall on these objects, you will be able to draw these by yourself also. The other places where we have highlights are here and here and here. Then we have a range of mid-tones. Mid-tone is just a color between the lightest and the darkest color. So you have all this is mid-tones and even a lighter mid-tone, but it can't be the lightest tone because that is your highlight, everything in blue. There is one more highlight here which I've forgotten to make. That's over here and here. So I'm just pointing this out to you right now so that you learn to see the different colors that you go into this object. But you won't really need to do this exercise this extensively. You will be able to figure this out even without having to draw all these arrows and do such a comprehensive study. Then in the end, we have the dark shades. Let me use a green for that instead. Here we have the dark shades. And even in the dark, you might have some variation. So you have a slightly lighter dark shade. In all, maybe if you have about 6 or 8 different tones, you should be able to render this object. That's about it. I'm going to make a screenshot of this just for reference, so you know how to identify these. All the other objects also, you will see something similar. You'll see highlights, you will see a shape of a shadow, and you will see dark tones. Okay, so we are going to attempt drawing this first, and first only in pencil. So I'm going to demonstrate this to you. I'm going to show you how to draw this shape first. That is completely separate of rendering it into a metallic, in a metallic shade. And that would be just as drawing practice, which you can use for all the other objects as well. And then comes the shading bit. Okay, so yeah, before I start on paper, normally when we look at shapes which are complicated, somewhere we feel that there is this need to draw that shape in one swoop. And more often than not, we are dissatisfied with our line. And you'll end up just erasing, and keep making that same swoop again and again and again, hoping that by some miracle, one stroke you're going to get that's going to be absolutely perfect. So I'm going to break that down for you. You don't need to do it that way. You just need to make a scaffolding first, and then you will build a line on top of that. So I'm going to be showing you how to break it into different basic forms, including a circle, rectangle, triangle, and then lines around that, and then smoothen it out. So in many ways, when you are faced with a complicated shape, think of it as sculpting out of basic forms. If you would have, maybe if you've had some exposure to how sculptors work, they obviously get a whole block of something like a marble or stone, and then they chisel away. And they don't come to the smoothest line first. You first remove large blocks, you start creating maybe a form. And then from the form, you start building out more grosser details and then into the finer details. And that's exactly what we can do. And we'll practice that with this shape, which at least on the face of it doesn't look very complicated, but when you start drawing it, it becomes difficult to draw. First and foremost, we aren't going to draw the shape too large. Keep it just so small. It may look like a big jug, so if you try to make it too big, you just spend too much time in discerning all the details and making sure that you put everything in place, and then proportions can go wonky. So, at best, I would advise you to draw the object in about the same size or maybe just slightly larger than the size you are seeing on screen. So, if you have a small screen, maybe you'll see the object this small. If you're seeing this on an iPad or on a laptop or a desktop, you might see it's so big, but no bigger than about 4 inches anyway. So to start with, go with the easiest shape that you can lift out of the picture, which is a circle or a rectangle. Just 1 second. Always make a center line through this shape. Based on this, you can start looking at uh, the width of the neck of this jug and make vertical lines along the center. So you know that you are at least making it symmetrical. Based on the circle again, you can use your fingers, or if you're watching the screen on seeing the reference image on screen, use your pencil to figure out of what proportion of the circle is the neck. As I see it, it is just short of one whole circle size above. Okay, 1 second. I think it would help for me to show you this on screen itself. So this is what I'm looking at. This is my, if I were to make a circle out of it, it becomes this big. So I'm making an oval shape here. I know ovals are a little difficult to work with because you don't know how tall versus how long you should make the oval. Here's the center line. And then you have to build a line next to it. Now, if you make it even more thoughtful, you will see that there is a proportion to these lines as well. That if you draw a horizontal line, the neck is a little more than 1/4 of the width of this oval. The spout reaches beyond the oval. The handle obviously is beyond, and then you can draw a line at halfway to figure out how much further. So if you notice, there are definitely some proportions happening over here. Now, of course, we can make a grid and draw all this, but with a grid, we are limited to only one object at a time. But in every object, there is some sort of grid that you can work with. This is more an internal grid. So I'm not creating a grid of 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. I'm using the internal geometry of this object itself to give me a guideline or some guidance about the proportions of this object. Now, because this is an internal geometry, I have no clue what these measurements are. They're not always equal, but they are in proportion to each other. So I'll share this image and then we'll proceed to draw. Now, using that image that I've sent to you, you should be able to draw a grid. And based on that grid, this is how you will make these shapes. You will only make straight lines. When we are making this handle, for example, I'll extend a certain line forward that's about the same width as this half of the oval. So I know how far I need to reach. And I start from here with only drawing these straight lines. It's much easier to draw straight lines than draw curves. And also you are able to see shapes even in straight lines. Your proportions can be seen before you start making these fine lines. The problem with making fine lines, especially these smooth, rounded shapes, is that you don't want to make them over and over again. So here you can draw again a base of a triangle. Look at the object in front of you, the reference image, and you should be able to see whether or not the proportions match. After you've done this kind of a grid line, and most of the lines are in place, go back to the original image without the guidelines to then smooth these shapes. And draw one part of the line at a time. Now, even over here, I have the neck coming down straight, and then I have part of the oval going slightly flatter, and then here it's slightly more upright. The jug is not entirely an oval shape. And then it comes back, the line comes back flatter over here. Then almost a horizontal base. Then going outward. And repeat the same on the other side. So where you are joining two curves, one curve is concave, the other curve is convex, and you need to draw a curve between them. Bring the two together and then only then make the small section in between, because then it's a smaller curve to tackle. And now at every point, look at the angles that you need to make. So we often make mistakes and the angles. You might make it too upright or too flat or go out too much. So just check at each point if you're getting the correct angles. Even when we have such a tiny shape, like the base, you can build in some kind of measurement Just avoid rotating your book if you can. Making curves in one direction are easier for one kind of handedness, and then the opposite for the opposite kind. But for example, if this is easy for me, if I decide to turn the book to make its corollary on the other side, I could get it completely wrong. Then you can start making the line details. And other things like this very crazy handle. So here also, feel free to add more items to facilitate your ease. Use the original grid to create the next grid, to create the next grid, so on and so forth, till you become comfortable with the shapes you're making. So what we want to avoid in this is to make fractured lines like this. When you start drawing your lines in this way, you get a very tentative edge. And even if it's accurate, it creates a micro texture in your picture that does not really do well for the overall image. And the other thing to do is to also hold your pencil far away and don't make any one line which is dark. If you need to make dark lines or shapes, go over the line, but only at the end. So at this stage, keep everything light. Once you have drawn all the required shapes the way you think is right, then you can erase the lines that you don't need. If you feel you need to make corrections, then make the correct line first and then remove the lines that you are unhappy with. Because the lines that are not working are the building block or a foundation or the step on which you then put a foot down and make the correct shape. If you remove it before making the correct shape, there's a chance that you might make the same line again because there's something that you see with your brain that has made you create the first line. After creating it, you have figured out that there could be some adjustment made. But if you remove that, the brain goes back to seeing only that line on paper. Okay, is everyone okay with this? All right. So I'll start erasing my grid lines.
Just have a look at this, Aditi. It's okay, no? With the grid line. Yeah.
Yeah, looks good. Looks good. Very nice. So, but what is the experience, Elaine? Was it easy for you to draw it with these grids?
Much easier with these grid lines because I started off with a circle and then just a center line and a side, and it wasn't working out. And then I started again, put only lines, squares, and then did it. So
Okay.
It's a lesson learned.
Okay, great.
To be so overconfident about drawing.
Okay. Now, the next thing to do is demarcate all the essential areas. So here on the left, we can start from the left by drawing a line that marks that mid-tone, which is not the darkest tone, and follow that shape to where you see the reflection of the table or the surface. At this point, now you can make the table or the base on which the jug has been kept also. Notice on the right hand side, the reflection of the handle itself, the handle detail can be seen, but it's compressed. It's not the whole size. So at this point now, you should focus on the exact shape that all these reflections make on the surface. And don't try to figure out what the object is. Look at it and just draw it in the size that it presents itself on in the photograph. The line that I'm about to draw now is a very fuzzy line, but I'm going to convert it into a bold line just for convenience. So it's important that you draw your lines very light. I'm ignoring this vertical highlight right now. I'm going past it to continue and make my dark shape there. We are going to make that highlight with an eraser, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, at this point, it'll help to use a good, sharp, well-sharpened pencil for shading. Start off with the mid-tones first. So leaving your highlights, just shade everything the lightest gray that you can make. And go over the dark spaces also. Now this is a quick way of rendering. Oh, I shaded the exact wrong parts. Sorry. This is the highlight. Because I did not make this mark here. Now here we see that just this bottom part, it's lighter on the left and starts becoming a little darker towards the right. So I'm changing the direction of my pencil and making it slightly darker on the right. This is bound to happen because we can see from the highlight that the source of light is on the left. So automatically some parts of the object are going to look dark on the right as well. There is a strange highlight at the base, which happens to be a reflection of the highlight of this base. Once this is done, then we can start shading the rest. Now, the second layer, you can change the angle of your pencil so that you can fill in a darker shade. You can use the same pressure or you can increase the pressure just a little bit. By keeping the same pressure, you still have control over how much each area is darkened by. Like for example, over here, on this particular stripe, there are still two tones of gray. one tone is very close to this reflection, and then there's a darker tone over here. It's all about creating the right dark and light and edge. So when we are doing this in pencil, any kind of pencil shading, remember that the shade that you create has to be in the context of the neighborhood. So I could make a metallic object look metallic even with maybe lighter shades of gray than the shades that we see in our reference image. But according to the reference image, some of these shades are much darker. So you can use the lightest pressure on your pencil and keep increasing the darkness of that area as you see dictated by your reference image. When professional artists take this up, they use a range of pencils. They will use right from maybe a 2B to an 8B pencil. Now I'm moving to the darker section. And at this point, if you want to, you can, I would have also done this in the past, leave that vertical line of the highlight because you don't want to have to erase something that you know you can leave unsketched. And darker colors come out with much more difficulty. Here I'm putting a lot of pressure because I don't want to layer it. But notice how I'm making only the middle section dark first. I'm not starting from the edge because I want to make it slightly fuzzy. So I'm bringing it up to the base of the neck, extending it on the right side because there is a sharp edge towards the highlight. But as I go to the left, I can reduce this pressure and make the edge suitably fuzzy as I can see it in the reference image. Now, as you shade, you will see that your proportions can be adjusted. So feel free to change proportions, make some areas wider, narrower. Everything is adjustable in this. I'm adding a deeper tone somewhere over here in the middle. So, what often happens is that somewhere at midpoint, you might start doubting yourself, thinking that the object is not looking like as it should. And very often, people will stop sketching at that very point so that you leave it at the point where it is glaringly obvious that it's not metal or whatever object you're trying to draw. So at this point, what probably is happening is that you stop thinking objectively about what you are making and start applying meaning to it. You start checking if it is really working or not. And this is very natural, it's bound to happen. So don't kick yourself too much about this. But when that happens, you need to regroup. If you feel disheartened, if you feel dissatisfied with the result, um, just walk away from your work for 5 minutes, maybe, and do something else, see something else, just about for 5 minutes. When you come back, that objectivity will return, and you will stop seeing the object as the jug or a cup or a kettle, and you'll again start seeing it as lines and shapes, so we can get back to the meaningful work of putting down shapes instead of trying to sketch a jug. Now, at this stage, you will notice how my pencil work is also pretty patchy. So if this is happening, go only to the sections where you feel you need to add a little more graphite and just work on that. Don't put too much pressure because pressure will only deepen the ridges in paper and you won't be able to load anything more on top of it. So keep your pencil flat. Also avoid the temptation of shading overhand like this. It seems like you are going to do a lot with it, but it's like one of those romantic notions that they put in movies that has sold very well, but in my personal opinion, it really doesn't work. Those lines work when you're making very long scale drawings only, not for shading as much. You have very little control over an object which you hold like this. But when you're holding the pencil in its normal hold, you can rest your hand and you get better traction and better control for your fingers. Now, at the bottom, again, we have a very fuzzy medium tone shadow. At some point, again, you will feel that you've done enough in one area. At that point, just shift and move to the next area and start the same process over there. Also remember that when you're darkening a particular spot, not the entire area usually won't be darker. At least a small sliver of the mid-tone would still be visible, will peek through. As with water, when we had sketched water, even in this, if you use that pencil paper stump, you will get a much smoother result. But I'm going to encourage you to keep that for when you are working on a much more formal project and you don't have the time to practice pencil control. Now, already with the highlights and the dark tones, you can start seeing some amount of reflection, and my picture is looking more and more convincing. So it's a combination of sharp, light shadow highlights against, I guess, cleverly juxtaposed harsh lines in dark color, some fuzzy edges here and there, and some fuzzy rendering of the shape to give it its 3D form. Now here I've left these two bands because they look like highlights, but they're not so light. So I will go over them. It's a little dark on this edge. My shape has become too wide, but I'm not going to fiddle with that now. A little dark from this side. And now at this point, I have a highlight. So here's what I wanted to show you. At some point, when you want to make a very shiny highlight, you can use a hard eraser. This eraser might not be able to do the trick quite as well. So use a hard edged eraser and just knock off some graphite from there. And at this point, again, do not use your fingers, but use a brush to remove whatever residue of that eraser dust you have left. Same thing on this as well. Now, similarly, on the edge, on the right edge of this large highlight, you can use our flexible eraser to just dab at the edge so that you can make it even fuzzier. And then that tends to also shine a little bit. And that's it. You just have to follow through the same process. Okay, are there any questions? There's still the lip of the mouth and the handle to shade.
Mine isn't so well demarcated, so it doesn't look as shiny, I think.
Okay, can I have a look?
The sharper the edges, I think, the shinier the object, right? Here.
Ah. No, but it's working. It's looking quite nice.
Thanks, but not as sharp. You know that shine. The highlight is so sharp there.
But for that, you can make that sharp edge.
Yes, with that.
Now with the pencil
With
or the eraser.
the eraser. Another reason to get it. What's it called, Aditi? Online we get it, or we'll get it in a Venus or something?
You should get it. This is called an
Mono.
mono eraser, something like that.
Okay. Mono zero or something.
Ultra fine something.
Ultra fine. Go to the that side. Mono zero. No, mono.
Mono zero, and the company is Tombow. Tomb.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, now other things to tackle with objects that I found a problem is the shadows. So when you make this, we it helps to put some kind of shadow. If not, at least some people think that they should put a shadow. And then in this process, they make a very messy shadow. So I want to just address that as well. Shadows are just a dark shape in what should be the base on the base of where the object is placed. So you can make a shadow even this small in the shape of an oval, usually on one side, starting from maybe the center, almost going horizontal of or just touching the base in an oval shape around the object on one side. And you can potentially just make a shade, a light tone like this, and keep increasing that lightly. So don't make it too dark. That doesn't look good. In any kind of object drawing, shadows and cast shadows. This is a shadow that is cast on the surface. Always looks more compelling. But if you muck it up, then even that which you worked so hard on
Mama, take.
on the object can look a little unconvincing. So scientifically, if you want to look at it, on the opposite edge of the highlight, you will find the shadow. Now you'll have some sort of metal objects even at home. I'm just going to get our metal object. So if you have references at home, like maybe something like this. No, of course, this is too shiny and you'll see my face in this. But you can place this on a surface and take a picture. Sorry, like this. And then try to sketch that as well. So if you just ignore my face and the camera, you'll notice that all the lines are silhouettes along the edge to give us the shape of the object. If I were to use this again, the dark lines all give us that shape. The highlight is right over here to give us that shape. Now, when we draw things like spoons, here's what happens. You see the design, but it's not fully visible. The highlights are much more complicated shapes. And then we are doing essentially the same thing, but in a smaller detailed shape. But if you look at it closely, you'll notice that you can create the outline and shade it pretty much like how you're going to shade it over here. So this is the dark patch, then you'll have a medium patch, another dark patch, and the rest is all highlights. So look at objects that you have at home, put them in front of you and try making a sketch of that as well. Okay, now shall we try painting with watercolor? I give the option to you. Do you want to continue and make another sketch first with pencil, or would you like to move to watercolor? It might be a little more complicated, but I'm going to do an easy watercolor for you. Shall we do that?
Yeah, for me, it's okay.
How about everyone else?
Watercolors for me.
Watercolor for Janita.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's try making, let's just stick with steel only right now, white metal. And let's start making that bell. Is that okay? Or we can make. All right. Shall we make this? Our options are this or this. I can show you this as well. Which one do you think you'd like to make?
The bell, I think.
Well,
You want, if somebody wants to, it's up to, what do the others say?
I think the brass one looks nicer.
this one?
I
The
like
brass?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, let's do this.
We'll look at the brass color first.
Okay.
Yeah, the color, it's
We'll get it. We'll get it. Don't worry. I'm here for that. Okay, let's start with drawing first. Same process. Identify, visualize where you want the object, break it up in the reference while observing the reference image itself, and then start making it. This one we can make slightly larger. Before you make the lid, make a rectangle. And then a half oval shape on top, and then fit in the knob. Always take some lines out from the existing shapes to give you a proportion on the spout. Once your shapes are drawn, first identify the highlights and the shadows. Now, there are quite a few highlights and shadows in different forms. So, go to one area at a time and make a shape, then make the shape next to it, and then so on. Carry on till you mark most of them. So, you have the base, work out the easiest shapes first. Then you have the surface, reflection of the surface along almost the equator of the pot. Then right in the center, you have a highlight. So mark a large spot for the highlight and a rough line coming down. Then you have two highlights here, and then you have some very detailed illustration, which we'll do later. If you've got any fine dark lines, you don't need to draw them right now because those will be painted at the very end. Notice how the knob also has ridges. If you can draw the ridges, great. If you can't, just draw a circle. Here also, the same part of the same reflection is seen on that knob as well. Has everyone finished drawing? Anita has. Okay, I got a message. I'm sorry, who is GM?
That's Geeta, I think, Ashok.
Geeta.
Ah, okay. I'm sorry.
See.
Yeah, got it, of course. So a few tips when you show objects on in metals, parts of the metal which are joining each other, you will see that they are completely finished elements which are either riveted or soldered or screwed into another object. So over here, you might be tempted to draw a line, say the shoulder of the teapot like this, and then on top of that you will draw a little what is that little thing, knob that comes out onto which the handle is then attached. So eventually when you paint it, this will look like a cartoon.
Oh.
What you should do instead is This is the shape, no doubt. We see it like that, but often there will be a slight curve to show that this is one finished object. It's ever so slight, not directly stuck onto this, onto the shoulder, but it's attached by either heating the metals. So can you see this little tiny V shape here? That makes all the difference in the picture.
Okay.
So when your image is not looking like it wants to, like you want it to look, there are these kinds of lines that can change, make the picture more convincing. So there are highlights over here as well, horizontal highlights. Okay. We will do a few base colors today, and we'll continue painting this next week because it's already 12 past 12. So don't rush through this. I've not yet drawn the details of the handle, so we can draw that later. Right now, let us try to paint maybe just the body of the teapot. Here we will use a combination of brushes. One 10 number brush to do a wash. Then you have a 6 or 7 number brush to do certain mid-tones. And finally, we will go to a fine brush. Your brush size is determined by the area that you need to paint and also the consistency of paint that you need. In order to make the colors, use a rough sheet, or you can use part of your book itself, the same page, to test the colors out. I'm cleaning out one section of my palette to make a new color palette. Ideally, don't wipe your palette until you really need it. And for our purposes, you don't really need to buy a separate palette also. This works very well. So I'm taking a color, set of colors over here. That's yellow ochre, gamboge, and I keep them separate. So I don't mix the two till I feel the need to. In watercolor, we mix very fluidly, aptly, no? So you don't really need to make bunches of colors ahead unless you're making a wash. Now, in this case, I need to give one overall wash to this object in such a way that I have a very light color here, no color on these spots, and preferably a fuzzy edge. And then a second layer will be a darkened yellow ochre mixed with another color to make it brown on this side. And then there's a sharp edge towards the base. There is some kind of texture on the container itself, and it could be because it's beaten metal, but I'm not going to make that.
What was the second color you took? One was yellow ochre and the other one?
Gamboge. I'm making the color palette over here. Gamboge is the warm yellow. So let's give this whole thing a wash. I'm going to demonstrate first and then you can make it. A mix of both gamboge and yellow ochre. More gamboge than yellow ochre. So I'm just toning it down a little bit, making it slightly duller I'm going to start applying it from the neck down and leave these highlights unpainted. I'm using a 10 number brush, but the tip of the 10 number brush is very sharp, so I can get a lot done, even smaller areas. I'm going to go around the highlight. I'm not going too close to it, leaving some room to create a fuzzy edge. So this is how I'll go about it, painting all through. This part can be nice and dark. And then as I come down, I'm going to refrain from adding more color. In fact, I'm going to dip the brush in water and spread the color downward with just water till I come down to the very bottom and there's only a light tinge. But don't stop here yet. With that same just water in your brush, go over just the edge of these highlights so that they become fuzzy. So just the edge, and that should do it. Do you want to try this now? We'll go step by step. So take your time, do this slowly, mix the color, be comfortable with the color. In case your color is too brown or too yellow, never mind, don't try to correct it. We are going to make multiple layers, and in those layers, that color will get, somewhere it will get its own correction done. So our picture, because it is painted and it's watercolor, we will not get the kind of effects that you see in a photograph at all anyway. So just forget about that. We are just merely trying to make a convincing illusion of a copper vessel. That's about it. Let me know once you're done with this layer. Then I'll show you the other one till your layer dries. You can just put a thumbs up on your image so I know that you're done. Okay, Elaine, I think is done. One done. Okay. Oh, this is an animated thumbs up now. Look what it's doing. It's doing this. Cute. Janita is also showing the same. All right.
Janita, how did you get that?
Even you got it. You're just in a different.
Really?
I
Yeah.
went to reactions on the down panel and I just clicked a thumbs up. There's reactions.
Yeah, I did that, but I don't think I did. Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
You can see it. Yours is actually visible on the screen.
Yeah, hers will be visible to you. Yours
Yeah.
will be to us.
Oh,
Geeta
she
is-
can't see it. Okay.
How do I take it off?
It'll go off on its own.
Okay, good.
Neeta, Vidya, Ashok, do you need a minute? Oh, you're done. Okay.
We're
Neeta,
done.
It's
Ashok.
Geeta.
Okay. Okay, Vidya is also done. All right. Now we are going to darken the shade a little bit, and we're going to turn the book around and do the same thing from the midpoint to the neck. This time round, we're going to take only yellow ochre. So you will just hydrate this section. A little bit of gamboge coming in there will not make a difference. And you repeat the process from here. So your colors might still be drying. Maybe you can just observe this. Put a nice sharp edge there with your brush. I'm still using the number 10 brush because it allows me to paint large sections really fast. So I am ignoring the highlights, and I'm painting an even larger circle around the highlights. Since this is a shiny object, if you land up keeping some white spots, it won't matter. This is done. Oh, I was supposed to make it lighter. So I'm going to lift off some paint. So you make it dark over here and don't add more paint. Just take this tinge down further and further. So you get a dark edge on top. I'll do it again in this third layer. And as we did with the earlier layer, again, fuzz up the edge around the highlight. This time you'll be further away from the highlight. It starts looking like that. And we've gotten our dark tones at the base. So my mistake was that I reloaded my brush at this point after about 1/3 was painted, but don't reload yours. So you get the same kind of dark to light effect, but going in the opposite direction. I'm going to do a third layer afterwards. So if your painting is fine and you make that vignette, you won't have to make that third layer. Okay, I'm making my next layer. I'm still using the same. I'm just going to use gamboge again. This time deeper, and I should get that effect now. So a dark edge. And here we can do it two ways. We can keep adding a lighter color, or I can keep reducing the color from the brush and just pulling it up. So resist the temptation of going over and over the sections that you've just painted. At this point, we can take the same color and paint the base. This is again just yellow ochre. At this point, using a medium-sized brush, we add the next color to yellow ochre. That's burnt umber. We're just going to do one layer of this shade right now and then leave it for next class. So this is just a slightly deeper shade than before. Oh, and I forgot to mention that it helps if you have all the shades that we have created also, so you can test them out. I generally don't test out paint on my paper, never in the corner or anything. I like to keep my sheets clean. So use a rough sheet for testing, because that testing also can make your picture look very amateurish. I'm taking a shade such that it's not too dark, it's not too overwhelming. And I will start making shapes around these dark shapes around the highlights as I see them, but in a medium tone, not the darkest tone that I can go. So I have this shape here, then I have a line, then I have some kind of shape here which goes into nothing. So if you press your brush down, then you end up producing very little color. And you can also paint in the same orientation as you see the object. So over here you see that either this object is turned or the metal seems to show reflect horizontally. So if you paint horizontally also, it will further add to the illusion. I'm not making the fine shapes yet. I'm just adding a base for them. So whenever you're adding deeper shades to a layer on lighter shades, try to keep it homogeneous. So keep the same shades in the second or third color. There's something about keeping the original color in the further or darker shades that makes the painting look much more smoother or softer. So what I mean is, now we've used gamboge and yellow ochre in building up these base notes. If we directly use a burnt umber in there, or maybe sometimes even a blue, then that can tend to clash too much. It does not seem very cohesive. At any rate, once we do a secondary layer on the primary, the primary layer is going to shine through. So it helps to create this color itself with the colors used in the primary basic layers. All the darker shades will go into a smaller area than you see the mid-tones. Okay, let's leave this here for now. and come back to it next week. In the first half, or even less, I'll complete the copper pot with you. If you give me just 5 minutes before we finish, I want to show you some renderings of other metal objects made in other mediums, not necessarily watercolor, but it allows you to see how our rendering is never going to match the photograph. There's one in which I think this is pencil shading along with charcoal. And there's another which is, I think it is watercolor, but it could also be oil paint. They are phenomenal, but you'll notice that you can tell that this is shading or this is a medium. You can really even see the lines, and yet it looks so convincing. Even here, you do see the texture. You see how the lines on of the brush are visible, but yet the overall shininess does, I guess, shine through. So even with imperfect lines or sometimes even imperfect shapes, if we just persist in putting layer after layer after layer, you will be able to create this effect. All right. Okay, so that's it. The pictures are available for you to even sketch more if you want to. The other metals can be rendered exactly the same way as this. So you can practice at least the drawing part of it. And while we are going to complete this, if there are any other materials that you'd like to learn, we can just send me the suggestions. We have just one more class, I think, next week, but we can push one more for in December as well and do 2 classes on materials. So with materials, it could be all sorts of things. Anything that covers the surface becomes a material. We could try brick, we could try stone, we could also try fabric. So in the later classes this week, I'm going to be doing, excuse me, fabric and drapes. So that also becomes material. So anything that is man-made that we often see around, wood is another material, or wooden objects, though wood is not man-made. Wooden objects can be, and rendering those can be fun also. So just look around and see if there's something that you find intriguing that you'd like to make, and send in some pictures and I can do some research before next week. Okay, so I will see you all next week then. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.